Yeah?
Yep.
Good,
Yep.
fantastic. Okay, so I would say the talk today is probably a bit more general than just our experiences in data. So we are going to, okay, let me see. Okay, we're going to, I'm going to talk about what secondary data are and what they look like. And I want to give you a flavor of how much data is out there. It's a huge amount of information. And then I will discuss a bit advantages and challenges and limitation. Then I will hand on to Min, who I think is going to discuss how to access some of the data from the UK Data Archive, how to use it effectively, and then give some examples. I will also give some examples, but in a more kind of while discussing the characteristics of the data.
Simonetta, sorry, before you start, are you happy for me to keep the time? So
yes, do.
if yeah, okay, all right.
Yeah. So what are secondary data? These are data that are collected for different purposes, and they're often available free of charge. Sometimes they are you might need to pay unless you use them for research purposes. Some of them are expensive and you need to pay whatever you want to use them for. But the important point is that the data are already there. They might be collected for administrative reason or for general research purposes. Some data set are really collected by researchers for researchers. As I mentioned, there's a huge number of data set that people use. It's growing. It's impossible to mention all of them. There's data for developing countries also, who you might have heard about the issue with US aid. This is a portal in the US that also had made a lot of this data available, which has kind of suspended in the last few days. But again, you can have data from many different sources, and depending on the data, you will go on different websites. When we talk about secondary data, this can be both quantitative data sets, so numbers to do statistical analysis, but also qualitative data sets. Some projects have collected, for example, have done focus group and then have deposited their scripts. These can also be used by other researchers. Some of them are in the UK Data Archive, and you can use them for qualitative type of research. There's various differences across data set. One thing that you want to take into account, now, if you think about research, you're going to select a data set based on your interest, right? The research question that you want to answer. So first, we need to take into account what is the population of interest. Now, there's data set out there which are about countries or regions or small geographical areas, say the proportion of immigrants, the unemployment rate, or pollution in different part of the country, for example. There are data about organization, and the data that I mostly use is about people. A lot of my research is about the UK, so I use data about people living in the UK. There's also data set which are about people born in a certain time. And depending on what you want to do, you will be able to answer a research question with one type of data or not. For example, the UK labor force survey is about people living in the UK in a certain point in time. So if you use this data set, you will have people of all different type of ages. Some will work, some won't. There are data sets that are called cohort studies. These include only people who are born, for example, in a certain week in a certain year. So if you use that type of data set, you will only have people who have the same age. Okay, so you won't be able to compare people of different ages. But these people in this data set will be more similar to each other than the people who are in the labor force survey because they have different ages and different other characteristics. Another thing to take into account is the time. So here you have cross-sectional surveys and longitudinal surveys. So cross-sectional survey have one observation at one point in time for people, for example. You might have information for people who lived in the UK, who were in the UK in 2003, and then that's all that you have. You might also have information about different people, similar information about different people who live in the UK in 2004 and then in 2005. But because these are different people, you only have one observation per person. Okay. And this contrasts with longitudinal data, which includes information for the same people over time. So this kind of data set will have, will start with a sample of people living in the UK in 2009, for example. They will ask them a number of questions. And then the following year, they will go back to the same people and ask similar questions. And then the following year, the following year, following year. Now, the UK household longitudinal study is one of these type of data set. And the advantage of this type of data is that you can really look at causation in a better way, because you can see, for example, people's changing circumstances. So, for example, people who had a job and then the following year they lost their job. And if in both years you ask them how happy you are, then you can look at the impact of unemployment on happiness, for example, which is not something that you can do so easily when you have cross-sectional data, because you will have different people over time and you won't be able to see the changes in their lives, essentially. Longitudinal data also have the problem, though, that they start with a sample of people living in the UK in 2009, for example, and this is the sample that you have. So if you have, new people coming, new immigrants, and so on, these are not necessarily going to be included in the data set. So it's going to be different type. The representativeness of the sample is going to be different than if you have cross-section data. Some example, just to drop names. So there's different types. As I mentioned, there's the data are collected for different purposes. Some of the data that we can use are administrative data. For example, if you want to do analysis on people who receive an employment benefit, the DWP collects data, have information on all those people who receive unemployment benefits. And if these are the people you're interested in, then it would be a good data set to use if you can get access to it. If you're interested in all people who don't have a job, then this would not be a good data set to use, because it only has those who do receive unemployment benefits, for example. So if you are uninterested in working or not working, then you might want to use other type of data set. I used recently data from the Higher Education Statistical Agency, which gives information about students who graduate from all universities. So with this data set, you can look at whether ethnic minority students are less likely to get a good degree compared to white students, for example. And if you think also RISE's data is administrative data, which we can use for research purposes, if you can get access to it, you could look at, for example, if there is a relationship between the grades that students have and the proportion of classes they attend, their attendance at classes, these kind of things. There's data that are from censuses. So you might have filled in the census. What was it in 2021? So the advantage of this type of data set is that they are very large. They include everybody, and you can get access to it. You might find on internet that there are websites that gives you information about regions or neighborhoods that are computed from the census, but you can also get information about a sample of people a sample of those people who actually answered the census. This is called sample of anonymized record. It's a random sample of the population who lived in the country on the year of the census. And you can look at relationship between different characteristics of these people. The advantage of censuses is that normally they have a large number of people in it, so the sample is very large, but you're limited by the number of information. For example, the census asks you if you work, what type of job you do, but it doesn't ask you how much you earn. So if you want to look at wage gaps, you're not going to be able to do it using the census. It's important to have an idea of what information is on each different data set. The census is essentially cross-section, so you have all information about the year of the census, but you can also get access to a data set which links the same people, a sample of people across the different censuses. So you have information about these people from, a long a number of years, although you have gaps of 10 years in between, but you can have a look at very long, trajectory of some of these people. And then possibly the data sets that are most used are surveys. So you have the general social survey, world value survey that ask people about typically their attitudes and their beliefs. Or you have data set like the labor force survey that asks people mostly about employment situation, their job, how much they earn, so on and so forth. But you also have time use surveys that give a kind of a grid to people, and they ask them at different interval, like every hours, what are you doing? And say how happy you are in this moment in time. And these are the type of data set that have been used to find that people are most unhappy when they commute, for example. Social media data now have been more likely, are used more a lot also, data from Twitter, X, Facebook, Reddit, and so on. The disadvantage of this type of data set is that you might not have a lot of information about the characteristics of these people. It is only what they need to register to that social media platform. And I would say the most recent advancement, at least in the UK, is that they are now linked data set that link the surveys, the census, and administrative data. So for some people, you will have a lot of information about almost everything that they do in their lives. So these are really useful for large, for many type of research questions, if you wish. The nice thing about data set is that the secondary data is that you don't have to collect the data yourself. So as Min will show, for some type of data set, you just go on the website, you click that you read and accept the terms and condition, and there you download the data. And you can start using it on the same day. Some require special license, so you might need to sign forms and give more explanation of what you do with the data. And generally, they are free of charge. So, compared to collecting your own data, this is really fast. Normally, they are large samples. Often, they are representative of the population on some dimensions. And they are high quality, especially the survey data that I mentioned. Their data collection follows best practice from survey methodology research. Questions generally are tested and validated, and there's some quality control before the data are actually released. And using secondary data really allows for replication because the data are there, they are the same for everybody. And normally what we do, we provide the code that we have used to do our analysis, and someone else simply clicking a button can replicate exactly our analysis. They can look at our code and say, well, actually, that part was wrong. I would have done that in a different way. What happens if I make this change? So it makes it much easier for others to replicate your analysis. Clearly, there's challenges and limitation because the questionnaire is preset, so you don't have any say on it. The data collection strategy is already decided, so if you wanted a different type of sample, there's nothing you can do. So it's important to kind of have a clear understanding of what the data are, who is the population that they represent, and what information they collect to see whether that data set can actually answer my research question. Sometimes, especially when you have general data sets like the labor force survey or the UK household longitudinal study, and you want to focus on a specific subgroup of the population, you might end up with sample sizes that are not too large, are quite small. For example, you're only interested in people who are aged, 20, then the sample size might become small, even in large secondary data set. There might be issues of non-response. It's a survey, but also in the census or in every data set, you might have missing information. And now you have to clarify whether the information is missing because that specific question didn't apply to that person, or because that person decided that they didn't want to answer the question. Normally, the data set will give you an indication of why the information is missing. And despite the fact that they do have some quality control, there might still be some possible inconsistencies remaining in the data set. So what I do when I start with a new data set, I spend a couple of days at least just studying the data manual to understand what the data are, what they can do and what they cannot do. But they're usually, and in economics, you are really interested in causality and mechanisms. And even if the data are high quality, you still need to use specific, econometrics and statistical techniques to get to causality. I think that's all I had to say. I can hand over to Min.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Let me share my slides first. Okay. Thanks, Simonetta. Now I'm going to show you how you can get access to secondary data. I'm going to focus on quantitative data and the UK Data Archive in this session. The UK Data Archive is the UK's largest and most trusted repository for socioeconomic and population data. Think of it as a gold mine for researchers. It was established in 1967 at the University of Essex, and it's been supporting research for over 50 years in the UK. The UK Data Archive hosts over 6,000 secondary datasets, mostly quantitative. We're going to look at the three examples. So first, understanding society. This is what Simonetta mentioned, also named as a longitudinal household study in the UK. This is a long-term study tracking UK households over years. It asks questions about income, health, and social attitudes, and so on. For example, researchers use it to study how rising living costs affect family well-being, how working conditions affect retirement decisions, etc. Second, the labor force survey. Updated every 3 months, this survey gives detailed insights into employment trends. It's how we know, for example, that remote working has doubled since 2020. Third, the Millennium Cohort Study. This follows the lives of around 19,000 children born in the UK between 2000 and 2002. It tracks everything from education outcomes to mental health and all related issues. Imagine using this data to study how early childhood experiences shape career choices. These kind of things, researchers do use secondary data. And these data sets aren't just numbers, and policymakers use them to design policies like childcare schemes or job training programs. The archive ensures all data is rigorously checked for quality and ethics. So whether you are studying poverty, education, or workplace trends, you can start here. It's your gateway to reliable, impactful research. Now, how do you get started? So first, you need to go to the website. Visit the UK Data Service website. Here is the link. I put it onto the slide. Once you're there, you need to sign up. Use your institution's login. It's free and the registration takes about only 5 minutes. So after signing up, head to the data catalog. This is like a search engine for the data sets. So let's say you are interested in doing research on aging populations. Then you can type aging into the search bar, and you'll see hundreds of results. Then you can narrow it down using the filters. For example, you can filter by time period, let's say 2010 to 2020. Not all data is instantly accessible. I think Simonetta mentioned that as well. Some datasets are open access, like the census. You can download these straight away. Others might require agreeing to terms and requesting access. The website guides you through each step. So we will talk about this in more detail later on. Oops, sorry. Let's get to 3. Yep. Once you have found a data set, it's time to work with it. Let's break this down. So first, use the search filters. If you are studying education in Scotland, filter by topic, education, and then country, Scotland. You can also filter by time frame. Maybe you only want the data from the last decade. When you've picked a dataset, download it in your preferred format. And most datasets come in Stata or SPSS formats. So these are great for statistical analysis. If you are using Excel or Python, you can choose CSV. And before diving into analysis, you need to check the user guides and survey documents. So these documents explain how the data was collected. For example, a survey might exclude people under 18, which could affect your analysis. Now, let's talk about permissions. The UK Data Archive has 3 access levels, and you must follow the rules for each. So first, open data. This is free for everyone. Examples include the census or government surveys. You can download, analyze, and share findings without restrictions. Second, safeguarded data. So this includes sensitive information like education records or health surveys. To access this, you need to register and agree to terms. For example, you might promise not to share raw data publicly. And third, controlled data. This is the strictest category. Examples include detailed medical records or financial data. Accessing this requires special permission. You'll submit a research proposal explaining your project's purpose and methods. You might also need to get ethics approval from your institution. In some cases, you'll need training on data security. So breaking these rules can have very serious consequences. For example, sharing safeguarded data online could lead to legal action or losing access permanently. So always read the terms carefully. If unsure, you can get in touch with the UK Data Service team. They will help you. Choosing the right dataset is like picking the right tool for a job. First, you need to align the data with your research question. For example, if you are studying income inequality, you need the data that tracks people over time. And then you can find it on the UK Data Archive. The Understanding Society is perfect for this. It follows households for years, which is great for tracking trends. And next, you need to check the credibility of the source. The government datasets, like the labor force survey, are pretty reliable because they follow strict methods. Academic dataset should have very clear methodology notes on things like how was the data collected, was the sample representative, and so on. You can find all this information on UK Data Archive. And raw data is often messy, 99% of time. Your first task is cleaning it. So most datasets have missing values here and there. For example, respondents skip income questions, then you need to think about how you are going to deal with it. And next, you need to fix inconsistencies. The dates might be formatted in different ways. You need to standardize them. Categorical variables like gender might use different expressions. You also need to harmonize these to avoid errors. So watch for biases and use weights. A survey might overrepresent young people if it's conducted online. So think about the mechanism behind that. But you need to adjust weights if the dataset includes them. For example, if rural populations are underrepresented, the weighting can balance the results. And ethics matter even with second data. The first, follow usage policies. If you use safeguarded data, even never share the raw files. In publications, you need to anonymize results. For example, if a dataset has rare health conditions, avoid reporting small groups that could identify individuals. Here, privacy is key. If you are studying a small town's employment data, for example, you need to aggregate results. Instead of saying 3 people in village X are unemployed, you can only say rural areas show 5% unemployment. Now let's look at real research using the archive. Some examples here, basically. So one study used understanding society to explore gig economy workers. It found they reported higher stress levels than traditional employees. So this actually helped unions advocate for better protections, for better labor protections. Another project analyzed labor force survey data and showed a big drop in EU migrants working in the UK healthcare sector. And the policymakers and the government used this information to adjust visa quotas for nurses, for example. And there is another study that found older adults experiencing loneliness have a higher risk of developing dementia over a 12-year period, using data from the English longitudinal study of aging. As a result, policymakers are emphasizing the development of social engagement initiatives to mitigate this risk. The future of secondary data is very exciting. First, there's been an open data movement. Governments now share datasets publicly. Websites like data.gov.uk offer free access to transport, health, and environment data. International organizations and companies like Google are also joining the trend. Second, the big data and AI are transforming our lives. For example, machine learning can predict diseases, outbreaks by analyzing NHS records. So finally, the use of secondary data facilitates interdisciplinary research. For example, by combining pollution data, health records, and employment stats, the researchers now can study how air quality affects workplace productivity. So this cross-domain approach solves very complex and real-world problems. And that's the end of our talk. Thank you.